There we go. All right, all right. Hey everyone, welcome back to another very late night live stream. I know it's late, I know, but there's just something that had been running through my head, and I wanted to talk about atheism, the impossibility for trusting human wisdom and human intellect and human abstract reasoning under atheistic assumptions, and some of the reasons that I think that atheism, given its materialistic considerations, does not really allow for a meaningful way to assess the reason or unreasonableness, the truth aptness or truthfulness of various claims, especially about abstract or metaphysical truths. And so I'm going to be talking about that a bit today, with Darwin's doubts about human reasoning. So I'm going to hopefully be able to pull this up in order to explain exactly what I'm talking about here. There we go. So, a couple things that we should understand, and something that Darwin explains in some of his doubts about man. Here it is. There we go. I should be able to share the screen, so I'm going to try to do that real quick. I'm going to see if I can share this little window right here. And then hopefully, if I can, then you'll be able to see exactly what I'm trying to show on the other screen. So here we go. Let me make sure I can hear myself here. Yes, I can. All right. So this is a really important image. Really important to me. I think this is fundamental to a lot of the issues that I think people should have when it comes to atheism. Charles Darwin said it like this: "But then with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind?" When Charles Darwin stated this, he was describing the fact that we as humans arise from lower animals whose faculties of reasoning we would not trust in terms of their convictions about reality and intellect, self-awareness, self-knowledge, simple metaphysical truths. We wouldn't trust an ape or a monkey's mind about these realities, about abstract principles, about the nature of mathematics, the laws of logic, and etc. But if we developed from the mind of these lower animals, if we developed from them, then on what good grounds or what good basis do we have for trusting in our convictions as being descriptive of reality as such? There's no reason. There's just not, because we arose through the same processes that their minds arose from. And there's nothing being tested for in reality through the development of certain intellectual faculties or reasoning capabilities about abstract truths, right? It's not like abstract truth reasoning capabilities and the ability to believe in metaphysical truths as rational, even without proof, just as necessary facts of reality. That kind of reasoning isn't something that's really going to be selected for in a meaningful way in the wild, or at least it shouldn't have been, especially in the case of humans, because all we need are survival apt and survival helpful behaviors. If anything, you could say that our faculties of reason and our propensity to focus on the abstract reasoning is a distraction from the possibility of hunting and gathering. A lot of people question the moral and ethical nature of eating other animals. I can guarantee you, other omnivores do not have this conviction about potentially unjust practices against other animals, right? What they do is they get hungry and they eat. A bear isn't going to question if it's right for it to eat the fish because the fish is going to feel suffering. No, it's going to eat the fish and it's going to survive. Humans, as a result of having these faculties of abstract ethical and moral and metaphysical reasoning, along with other abstract truths that we consider, seem to have some sort of impediment in our evolutionary reasoning. And yet, this kind of behavior has become common in humanity. It's a behavior that has grown to become ubiquitous in human thought and human development and human cultures across the world and across time. Well, if that's the case, for what reasons, what selective pressures allowed for such abstract reasoning faculties, which are seemingly distracting from other reproductive or survival based actions? What would allow for these things to be selected for? What would allow abstract reasoning capabilities to be selected for instead of, say, the kind of convictions of an animal who simply hunts whatever animal it can find and eats it? Or why do we, having developed from the lower apes, why would we have any good reason to trust our reasoning abilities about morality, about ethics, about the nature of objectivity versus subjectivity, mathematical truths, the laws of logic and their application in real circumstances, general ethical dilemmas and the possibility of even recognizing dilemmas in the first place? Why do we have any good reason to trust these convictions of our mind when it could very well be the case that later down the road, just like it was the case with the lower apes to us, and now we trust our convictions, but not those of the lower apes? And I know lower and evolutionary biologists perhaps would not use this term in the same way that Darwin did, but animals with decreased or less complex rational and reasoning faculties. Okay, why would we find that our convictions are actually trustworthy about these abstract truths and abstract reasoning, and these apes aren't, when it could be the possibility, the reality, that later on down the road, there's an evolutionary development from much later down the road in which some new species arises that might have branched off from what we call Homo sapiens today. And this group of new, whatever you want to call them, have completely different convictions about reality and the nature of reality, metaphysical, moral, and ethical truths, about the nature of empiricism and our ability to trust our senses. Maybe they change in their convictions and they believe that empirical data is actually not valuable and it's not really trustworthy at all, right? Who's to say? In that case, they would look down on us as the lower apes now, whose convictions would not be worth trusting about deeper metaphysical and abstract truth reasoning. So, Darwin offers a pretty interesting dilemma, I think. Darwin offers this doubt that becomes very important. And it's one of the reasons why I think atheism, especially and specifically naturalism or materialistic atheism, is not a meaningful way to approach the world. If you're not able to trust your mind's convictions about reasoning and the usefulness of reasoning, about abstract truth considerations and your intellectual faculties, about the difference between illogical and logical, irrational and rational. If you can't trust your mind's ability to reason about any of these facts of reality, then are you really the person that should be reasoning about which religious systems are truth apt or non truth apt, reasonable or unreasonable, rational or irrational? That just doesn't make any sense when your system doesn't allow for you to trust your reasoning faculties as being axiologically valuable, axiologically worth listening to. Atheism, just from an axiological, from a value based perspective, eliminates your reason to trust your reason because your reasoning is not so much a matter of reality, but a matter of pragmatism. Your reasoning is just a tool that has been helpful in some cases, perhaps. In what cases, we don't really know, but in some cases, your reasoning has been helpful to help in your survival. But after it is done helping in your survival, how far can your reasoning faculties really go? Should you trust your reasoning faculties about physical concrete truths? Should you even trust your reasoning faculties about abstract truths or philosophical truths? It doesn't seem like there's any good reason, prima facie, to trust an atheist's self analysis of their beliefs, because under atheism, you have no good reason to think that your reasoning abilities are actually reasonable or useful or reveal reality as it actually is. That's the issue with atheism. Atheism doesn't provide a worldview that allows for reasoning, rationality, and logic to be trustworthy ways to approach considerations about reality. Because again, to go back to what Darwin was saying in Darwin's own quote on this subject, on this matter, and this is really important to understand, right? But then with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind? This is a great question that Charles Darwin asks, and it's a very fundamental question that I have heard very few good responses from. Because, fun fact, each time that I've heard an atheist try to give a response to Charles Darwin's own doubt about the reason and rational faculties of the human mind, what they have to do is they have to presuppose that their mind is able to reason so that they can give reasons to trust their minds under atheism. But that's presupposing it, not really proving it. That's what I've seen every single time, right? Every single time under atheism, given the fact that we have no good reason prima facie to believe that there is, reasonable faculties and rational faculties in the human mind that are worth trusting, right? Since we lack any type of prima facie reason to believe that our minds are able to think about abstract truths, philosophical truths, metaphysical truths in a trustworthy and reliable way, then what we need something to show or prove. Well, here's the issue. If an atheist gives an argument that tries to give reasons to show why, under an atheistic evolutionary model, you have good reason to trust your mind's ability to reason about metaphysical, abstract, non-concrete, non-physical, or philosophical truths, well, here's the issue. You're using reasoning, which is the thing you're supposed to prove, not the thing you're supposed to assume. And so I've never seen a good atheist response to this. Maybe anyone in the comment section could show me if there has been any, but I've just never seen it in literature. I've never seen any good responses that don't presuppose the thing that they're requiring, the epitome. These arguments are also near the top of my list for arguments against naturalism. Plantinga's argument against naturalism is also great. Thank you, the epitome. Thank you. That's so right. I actually have that in my philosophy of religion text over there. Plantinga's argument against naturalism is one of the most intelligent responses I've seen, because it's true. Actually, you kind of see this in Michael Ruse. He's an atheist philosopher, but you see this in his understanding about the untrustworthiness of the human mind about deep convictions. He does it from a moral perspective. So what he does in his writing, and it's a really good paper. I actually have a presentation on the YouTube channel a while back about it. I'd like to redo it though in a better, higher quality state. But what Michael Ruse describes is that humans have this deep conviction about morality as it being objective. Humans just have this sense that morality is objective, that even if we have these reasonings about it maybe being subjective here and there, that there are certain things in morality that are objective. And these certain things are worth fighting for and fighting about. And Michael Ruse explains that this is actually an evolutionary deception in a naturalistic system, at least. It's an evolutionary deception that is very useful for allowing us to form, greater bonds and pairs and greater communities that have higher survival outcomes and benefits. So this deep conviction about morality and the objectivity of morality is a helpful and useful evolutionary deception. But then Michael Ruse kind of reasons through this and says, well, now, wait a second. This is a deep conviction of humans. What other deep convictions are we likely being deceived about just because it's pragmatic and not because it's truth apt or actually reflective of reality in a meaningful way? Well, that's a good question. Michael Ruse offers a really good question. And in my presentation, I described that there is this type of insurmountable agnosticism in naturalism. As a matter of fact, I'll pull it up really quick, and maybe the epitome, if you're still watching, feel free to let me know. I'm watching the live chat over here, so maybe you can check out my presentation as I go through it. But I'm going to go this way, and you tell me if you're following along, because I have it right around here on one of my presentations. I've got so many presentations for my students, but I believe I have it right around here. There it is. Wow. 2023, that's when it was. That's something. That is something. So, right here, we have the insurmountable agnosticism of the naturalist. This is on Michael Roos, Naturalism, the Death of Reason. So, I did this as a response to some of his philosophical writing in the Philosophy of Religion journal that we were working through in class. But what I was going through in the Philosophy of Religion class is Michael Roos's descriptions about the untrustworthiness. He's an atheist philosopher, but he himself describes atheism as, or naturalism specifically, as leading to this impossibility of really being able to discern the reality of our convictions and the subjective experience of them as just being evolutionary deception. And so some of the terms that are important to know I describe in this part, but don't worry about that too much. What's really interesting is there's the naturalist challenge to religion. So what he tries to describe are these purely naturalistic, non-supernatural explanations for morality and other aspects of human thought that can be tested for in the origin and design of life, free will and consciousness, and objectivity of morality. That last one he really speaks quite a bit to towards the end of his article. But all of these are meaningless because of a poor epistemology in naturalism. And so I try to describe it like this, because it's all meaningless. It all becomes meaningless as we go through his writing. He describes methodological naturalism, which embodies the proper procedure for acquiring knowledge. So he says this is done by use of reason and observation. Reason and observation. Now, the epitome, if you're still watching and anybody else, what might be the issue with a naturalist and who uses methodological naturalism? What's the issue with them using reasoning and observation as their standard for procuring and acquiring knowledge? For any of you two people watching, what might be the issue with Michael Roos using reason and observation as the standard for procuring knowledge? And as you think about that, I'm going to grab this book because it's right there. And I think I know what page has this on it. There we go. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Religion and Science. William Dembski. Having Plantinga, Naturalism and Science are incompatible. I do love that one. Soul needs the brain to continue. Miracles. The evidence for miracles is weak. Encounter between naturalistic atheism and Christian theism. All right. That means I'm pretty close. That's Michael Peterson. There's Michael Roos. All right. This is Michael Roos, The Naturalist Challenge to Religion. Really interesting stuff. Riveting, really. That's page 427. Also, I really did enjoy this stuff. It was quite interesting. But he cites methodological naturalism's ability to explain the origin and structure of organisms without appeal to divine design, and even its ability to explain religion as a purely human phenomenon without assuming it relates to a divine realm. So Roos's case for metaphysical naturalism is heavily influenced by how he sees the role of methodological naturalism, which we again described as that process, that procedure for acquiring knowledge. So he goes through all this stuff. He goes through all this stuff about objective morality, the sense that things like rape, and y'all know about that from my previous live stream with the rape gangs in England, but how rape just feels objectively wrong, but really that's a type of deception. It's an illusion. As a matter of fact, let me read what he says as we're going through. Perhaps, however, we need to look at things in a different way. Could it be that the emotivists were right and that all we have with morality is a bunch of emotions that fuel us to be moral? We don't have any reference to any matters of fact, natural or non-natural. However, where the emotivists were wrong, or at least incomplete, was in thinking that morality means nothing more than a bunch of emotions. Rape is wrong translates out into I don't like rape. Perhaps with the addition, I don't want you to rape either. But rape is wrong really means rape is wrong, meaning rape refers to some objective fact true beyond our feelings about its wrongness. The Darwinian point of relevance here is that there really is no objective fact beyond us. So, in a sense, morality is an illusion, or at least our sense that morality is objective is an illusion, because my feelings are certainly not illusory. But why all of this? Because if we did not think morality was objective, before long it would break down as we begin cheating. If rape isn't really wrong, then why stay back when others move forward? So the entirely natural case is that morality, the objectivity of morality, that is an illusion put in place by our biology to make us social animals, because social animals are selected over non-social animals, as I was describing before. The epitome. I'm still watching, by the way. I just had to rewind to watch from the beginning. I'm catching up now to where you're responding to me because I'm on double speed. Right on. Thank you so much for watching the epitome. I'm just going through this reading, so it's clear that Michael Roos is admitting that the objectivity of morality is an illusion put in place through evolutionary means. And so, what he goes on to say is, he starts to say, he does not make a, or he talks about Plantinga's response to naturalism and that it seems like it's inconsistent. So Plantinga argues that the whole methodological naturalistic program collapses in on itself because it is incoherent. If you are a methodological naturalist, then, as we have been doing, you will take a Darwinian approach to human nature. But then, as we have been doing, you will admit that sometimes selection may and will deceive us for our own good in the evolutionary sense. We cannot always trust our beliefs, or to quote Charles Darwin, we cannot trust our convictions, right? Generalizing, Plantinga claims that we can never know which beliefs to trust or not to trust, including those of evolution, and so everything collapses in paradox. Somewhat cheekily, he quotes Darwin. With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which have been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? As a matter of fact, Darwin immediately excused himself as a reliable authority on such philosophical questions, but this somewhat awkward point goes unmentioned. It doesn't matter if Charles Darwin excuses himself of the philosophical nature of it, because he still pointed out a good question that needs to be answered, so that doesn't change anything. As does the fact that Darwin was explaining why he saw purpose in life, something one might have thought Plantinga would have welcomed. Again, not answering the question. So what does one say? Well, one thing we can say is that selection does not deceive us randomly, but for good reason, as we suggested in the morality case. And because we are deceived, it does not follow that we cannot find out about it, as in the morality case. Well, here's the issue. Finding out about it is just as much due to evolution as morality was, so nothing is knowable. To be very clear, if finding out, these belief undermining arguments are my favorite because it reveals the axiological meaninglessness of naturalism. Thank you, the epitome. Thank you. And it's true. It's a consistent fact of reality that naturalism is an incoherent system. It doesn't offer any prima facie good reason to trust the reasoning faculties and the intellectual faculties of humans. But then it posits itself as an intellectually viable option for human reasoning. Which one is it? And any attempt you make while admitting the kind of, illusions that evolution allows for, it kind of gives you good prima facie reason to think that we have certain beliefs and deep convictions and deep senses that are illusory. And also, Michael Roos here has horrible responses. As I go through, just listen to how bad some of these are. It's really bad. What does one say? Well, one thing we can say is that selection does not deceive us randomly, but for good reason. Yeah, for good reason, as in for our survival. That doesn't mean that we can still trust all of our beliefs. As a matter of fact, that doesn't answer the question, can we trust our beliefs at all? All it says is this helps our survival. So that good reason is just for you to survive and not because it's true. So horrible response. So the case is clearly not as dire as Plantinga suggests. No, it is. He just is trying to say, oh, it's for good reason. Yeah, not good intellectual reason. He's trying to import reason into it, but that doesn't actually help. It's for survival reason. His own favorite examples, thinking one is at a major feast in Oxford College discussing atheism with one's famous philosophical neighbor, when really one is fighting off crocodiles in the jungle. But the fact is that selection doesn't work that way. Arguing philosophy is not the key to killing crocs. Believe me, I live in Florida and I know. So here's the issue: arguing philosophy is not the key to killing crocs. Then why do we have the reasoning faculties for philosophical thinking if it's not valuable for survival? If it's not valuable for survival, what's the point of having it? And for objective morality, we could have just had deeper pair bonding like you see in a lot of other animal species that have deep pair bonding, but not necessarily some sort of deep ethical system of objective moral frameworks. For example, when Lewis says that on naturalism, reason developed through a historical process of non rational processes, which seems to contradict our intuition that the laws of logic are eternal. Exactly right. Which again isn't a self undermining system. That's exactly correct. But if you think this is bad, listening to Michael Roos, just so you know, because again, he hasn't actually addressed anything Plantinga said, it gets worse. It actually, I kid you not, if I believe things for a reason of survivability, not for truth, all my beliefs are epistemically undermined. Exactly right, because it's purely pragmatic, not truth apt. That's exactly right. All of your beliefs would be solely for survival and not for actual sapience, not for wisdom or intellect about the truth aptness of certain truths in reality or certain principles in reality, certain systems of reality. Exactly right. But again, believe it or not, the epitome and anyone else who's watching, I see we have 3 people watching. How are you doing? This is about to get really bad. So just follow in here. After failing to respond to anything that Plantinga says, he then goes on to say this. Yet, could you not say that in some general sense, we could be living in total deception? In some systematic way, selection could be shifting all of our beliefs out of kilter, rather like someone in a factory with red lighting, thinking that all the products are red. So, although we might be able to tell reality from an illusion within the system, we can tell when a product is flawed or not. We cannot tell how things really are. My suspicion is that there may be something to this, but we have been aware of this point at least since Kant, if not Hume. All of our knowledge comes through our human faculties. If they distort reality, so be it. The best we can have is some kind of coherence theory of truth rather than a strict correspondence theory. The best we can do is to make all our judgments hold together coherently. But this, a position that Hilary Putnam calls internal realism, really is quite enough. As always, one is reminded of Hume, this time on skepticism. Really, philosophically, there is no escape. But psychology rescues us. Most fortunately, it happens that since reason is incapable of dispelling these clouds, nature herself suffices to that purpose, and cures me of this philosophical melancholy and delirium, either by relaxing this pensive mind, or by some avocation and lively impression of my senses, which obliterate all these chimeras. I dine, I play a game of backgammon, I converse, and am merry with my friends. And when, after 3 or 4 hours' amusement, I would return to these speculations, they appear so cold and strained and ridiculous that I cannot find in my heart to enter into them any farther. Think about that. This is a famous philosopher, atheistic philosopher, Michael Roos. And his response to after admitting that it's extremely likely that our reasoning faculties and everything else could very well be so off kilter that we have to change our theory of truth to a coherence theory of truth. Which, by the way, if you change to a coherence theory of truth, it still collapses back to a correspondence theory of truth because now you're saying that you actually see in the system things that actually are the way they are, which means they do correspond to something. And so his argument for a coherence theory of truth doesn't actually change anything because they would still have to correspond to something in the system, which means it's still correspondence theory. But he doesn't know if the system is real within the system because our reasoning faculties are undermined by the naturalistic system. But even after allowing for this real case of illusory evolutionary deception of our reasoning faculties, his response, after accepting that that's a very real possibility and might even be the case, his response is this: I just don't think about it. I just kind of hang out with my friends, play some backgammon. And then when I come back, I'm like, "Ugh, that just doesn't seem fun to think about." This is an atheist philosopher who's supposed to be a really intelligent thinker, and this is his response to the very real possibility that under naturalism, there's no way to know reality rightly, And actually, you have good reasons at the start, taking all of the naturalistic assumptions in and just accepting them as they are. Just starting out with naturalism, you have no good reasons to trust your reasoning faculties. It's not even really a thing that you necessarily have to come to, discover. It's just a fact implicit within the naturalistic system that you have no good reason to. And the more you research into naturalism, the less reason you have to trust your reasoning faculties. In his response, yes, exactly right. Yeah, it's just a brute fact, lol. And barely even that, by the way. It's not even. It's just a brute fact. It's actually a step lower than that. Because at least with the brute fact, you're like, okay, well, I can trust it. No, he's actually admitting that you can't. The brute fact is, I don't want to think about it. The brute fact is, I just like having fun with my friends so that I don't have to think too deeply about it. There's no actual response to this. He even says, most fortunately it happens that since reason is incapable of dispelling these clouds, because otherwise it would be circular, right? And also because he has to presuppose that he's come to the conclusion that naturalistic reasoning has no good reason to be trusted, right? Most fortunately it happens that since reason is incapable of dispelling these clouds, nature herself suffices to that purpose and cures me of these philosophical melancholy and delirium. So what that means is that he says, well, if you use reason, you just can't get out of this one because we can't trust our reasoning under naturalism. He admits it. He actually admits it. Instead states, but if I kind of just distract myself with enough fun things, then I don't really think about it. This is a this is a philosophical article in a philosophical journal. This is in the Philosophy of Religion, 5th edition, selected readings. This is supposed to be really like high stuff. Oxford University Press, okay? This is supposed to be really high level stuff. That's the Michael Ruse. And his response to the claim by Plantinga that naturalism is incoherent is he's like, maybe, yeah. Like, I don't know why this makes me feel like I'm going crazy. This actually makes me feel like I'm going crazy. But in either oh, naturalism. Goodness. In either case, as we go through my presentation, I hope to make this a little bit clearer, even more clear if it's not already. Although I feel like, the only honest response I've heard for Plantinga's argument is, well, I can't be rational in holding to evolution and naturalism at once, but I still irrationally believe them both. You know what? That is an insane comment if someone said that, but I do appreciate them taking that honestly and just saying, I don't accept both of these rationally. I accept both of them irrationally. Uh, that kind of honesty I can respect in the most general sense of respect, not like intellectually respect it, but I can respect that they're at least honest. So that's cool. We'll take that. We'll take that. But yeah, in this case, the honest response is I just, I have fun with friends, so I don't think about it. And so these are some points that were important in this article that he wrote in the earlier parts. All of our knowledge comes through our human faculties. If they distort reality, so be it. So, um, so that means that all of these naturalistic approaches and, whatever we might be looking at, it deals with survival, not truth. So that's what we're going to be looking at here, right? Naturalism and these forms of naturalism deal with survival, not truth. Our reasoning deals with survival. So let's say that we've got this fella. Let's say we've got this fella. And let's say this fella. Oh, whoopsie. If it just froze up a little bit. Oh, is this the incomplete version of it? Okay, I have to find the complete version of this presentation right here. Let me see if I can find that and send it over because I've got the whole thing, the insurmountable agnosticism of the naturalist. I got this whole thing somewhere. Let me see if I got it elsewhere. I have this entire presentation also elsewhere on YouTube, on my channel. So I'm going to see if I have any of my, let's see, PowerPoints. Well, who would have guessed it? I do. Open with Drive. and I'm going to send it now to myself via Gmail so that I can pull it up for y'all right now. Yeah, that's the full one. Okay, perfect. Don't worry about it, everybody. I found a way. I was able to hack into the mainframe. It was fine. Let's see if I can do that. If I can. 3, 2, come on. Let's see. Also, if you're watching right now, I see I have 3 viewers. Feel free to leave me a like because I enjoy being able to know if people are understanding my content as we go through. I got the presentation. This is great. Okay, this is perfect. This is good. So I'm going to share the screen so that y'all can see this again. There we go. Alrighty. So we're going to show this beautiful thing real quick. The insurmountable agnosticism of the naturalist. And after defining some terms, I explain what this article said, this philosophical article, which really did. For any naturalists listening, theism avoids all of these issues because on theism, rationality exists prior to the natural world and is the avenue by which we perceive the natural world. Thank you, the epitome. That's exactly right. Again, in naturalism, you actually come to the knowledge that your reasoning is not worth trusting. There's no good reason to trust your reasoning faculties about the nature of reality, the nature of causality, the nature of the external world, metaphysical truths about other minds, laws of logic, and a world that is at its base rationally able to be perceived or was made to be perceived in a rational way. Under theism, as the epitome was saying in the comment section, under theism, the earliest assumptions about existence is that it's made by a rational intellect, such that the world is, rational and perceivable as such, and so there's order in the world around us, and also humans are made with rational intellects that are able to perceive the rationality and the order of the universe around us. So, under theism, if there's a rational world, and specifically in Christian theism, there's the assumption of us being made in the likeness of the rational creator. We're made with rational faculties to perceive the rational and natural order of the world around us. And so the world is perceivable as rational and orderly, and we are able to trust our minds as being part of that rational order, since we're also in the universe. So, again, theism is able to avoid a lot of these issues because we have the early assumption that you actually can uh, understand the world and all of creation as a rational and orderly creation. And that includes us as part of that creation. Therefore, we'd be orderly in our perceptions of it as well. Uh, Under naturalism, you have no such assumption. As a matter of fact, the assumptions and the later conclusions, like Michael Roos, the more you reason about it from naturalistic assumptions of evolution and atheism, really lead you to have less and less reason to trust your reason faculties, rational faculties, as time goes on. So, do you think the reason a lot of naturalists don't feel the weight of these arguments is because they don't recognize that these are prima facie critiques? I think so. I think so. I think they don't understand that we're describing these as, like out the gate, the world is made rationally and orderly under theism. Out the gate naturalism, the world is not made in some sort of rational way that was made such that it can be understood by rational intellects, right? So if you start with those assumptions, there's prima facie, like, but before anything else, you got these assumptions that are at the baseline, right? Where it's like, all right, well, the universe kind of just exists because of these natural laws, the natural states of being, and as a result, it just kind of exists. There's no sense in which the universe is made such that its order is communicative or communicable to other rational intellects like human beings. There's no reason to assume that. Prima facie for theism, you have a reason to assume that our minds would be attuned to the rational order of the universe because we're a part of that order. And we're, under theism, there's a type of personal creator who makes it such that, again, this is theism, not deism. So there is an assumption of a personal nature here present with this God and creation. And there's this sense of an intelligible order, and it's meant to be communicative. So prima facie, like at the face of it, theism, you would expect good reason to trust your ability to find order and a type of rational creation that's able to be perceived as such. Under naturalism, you would not expect that. However, we do see a creation, we see a universe that does have order. And so there's good reason to support theism on this one. But then also, under theism versus naturalism, under theism, we have the prima facie assumption, or we have good reason prima facie to assume that our reasoning capabilities are trustworthy. Under naturalism, you have no such reason to trust in your reasoning abilities. And craziest part is after the initial prima facie portion, you have less reason. The more you think about evolutionary principles, actually, if you take evolutionary principles and that's part of your naturalistic assumptions, then prima facie, you actually have less than just neutral reasons. You have no good reasons. You should actually be aware of deception as being implicit in the evolutionary process for developing behaviors that are pragmatic, that are good for your survival. And so, since that's how it is at the outset, at the get go, right? Then you really shouldn't expect at all a world that's easy to be perceived and rationally ordered, such that it's communicable to other rational minds. But you also shouldn't expect your mind to be rational and able to uh, accept and explain reality as it is with your deepest convictions. So on naturalism, I'd expect basically nothing. Well, naturalism doesn't predict the kind of world we perceive at all. Yeah, it also doesn't predict our ability to perceive the world at all in any real sense. So, yeah, I agree completely. I agree completely. And as we go through this, I think that becomes a bit more clear and apparent. So, this is my explanation here. Methodological naturalism is self defeating. So, objective morality is an illusion from evolution, according to Michael Roos. Therefore, evolution can and does produce deceptive or illusory beliefs, thoughts, and convictions, even deep ones, because the belief of the objectivity of morality is a very deep belief. That's very deep conviction that has real world consequences on our culture, on our legal systems, on the movies we make, the books we write, on the philosophical arguments that atheists provide against theism. The notion of the objectivity of morality is a very deep conviction, a very deep set of beliefs that are very intuitive to us. So apparently, our most deep and basic and intuitive convictions are able to be illusory. Therefore, all of our perceptions may be wrong and deceptive in some sense. And Michael Roos, that's not too much of a jump, right? Michael Roos actually allows for this consideration. He really does. So my conclusion there is the fundamental grounding for naturalism, observation and reasoned conclusions. If you want to recall that, that's straight up what he said, right? This is done by use of reason and observation. It's methodological naturalism embodies a proper procedure for acquiring knowledge through reason and observation. Well, turns out our deepest beliefs and thoughts are which are part of our reasoning capabilities, our convictions from our reason, and our convictions from our observations that lead to certain reasons is illusory, right? So the fundamental grounding for naturalism, which is methodological naturalism based off observations and reasoned conclusions, is undermined by naturalism, according to Michael Roos. So think of it like this. We've got Nat the naturalist, and basically all these different parts are attached to his body. He's got one filter for the shape. Number one, it alters the shape of whatever he's seeing. So originally it's a little apple tree, but the first layer, the grays, that's kind of like a funny way to think about if rods were extended out of your body and so placed in front. So those modify the shape that he's seeing, so that it looks like a bush instead. And then panel 2, the light enters through, and what you get is a change in the color that's being perceived. Because for some reason, seeing the bush, that tree, as like a bush, and instead as a type of a purple thing instead of red, the red might have caused us to be afraid of it through evolutionary processes and procedures. And so us seeing this exact formation and perceiving it in that way would have been more beneficial for our survival for some reason. And then after that, We also have number three, right? So we have some sort of inhibitory part of our body. We have this inhibition on our hearing, so we can only hear certain frequencies, because if we heard more frequencies, or if we heard frequencies more aptly, more correctly, then we might have had less uh, ability to survive for some reason. Again, we can't always know exactly the reason, but under evolution, I'm sure eventually the answer will come through, right? Number four, also our ability to touch has been inhibited by certain parts that are just sewed on. That's what the little red stitch lines represent, a type of sewing on. So these are just permanent aspects of our being that can't be changed, can't be removed by our own efforts. And so number four, our ability to, sense things through touch is also inhibited. And so we can't really feel reality as it is, just kind of this like loose understanding that's just beneficial for our survival for some reason. Maybe it's because the gloves keep us warm. Who knows? Number five, again, also we have this sieve, this sift that alters all the different chemicals entering into our mouth so that only certain flavors can come through. So maybe the apples, there's all these different sugars in them, but we can't really perceive those sugars. And so we can only perceive apples as these like banana tasting fruits, when in reality that's not how they are, but that's the only chemicals coming through to us. Then number six, also his nose has been closed so that only certain scents are able to get through. So he can't really smell reality as it is either. But again, that's stitched onto him. And so he can't know any better. I mean, how is he supposed to know? All of these things are essential to his being, and he can't undo any of them. And then number seven, his brain. That's the most important one. So his brain is just hardwired to take all of the information, the limited information available to his body that's already being altered due to evolutionary deceptive principles that help him survive somehow. And it's taking all this information, integrating it, and allowing reasoned conclusions to come about through these deceptive observations. But fun fact, besides the observations themselves and his ability to sense being off, also his brain is off. His brain has a little asterisk to look down at the calculator. Let's say you have a calculator that just is, programmed poorly. It's programmed poorly so that it ends up, reading things in the wrong way. And so maybe I saw some other calculators that said like, hey, if you do 2 plus 2, it equals 5. So maybe the calculator is programmed wrong. But this one was just programmed so that it did not do the order of operations in the way that it was supposed to necessarily. And so it didn't give the answer that it was supposed to, right? So maybe that's the case. But if that's the case, then basically his brain, which he needs to use for reasoning capabilities, has been programmed deceptively through evolutionary pressures and selective pressures to take all of this information and then still get it wrong. So if that's the case, if every single one of your faculties of sensation, observation, sensation, and then your faculty or your source of your faculties of reason, your brain, if all of these have been programmed with some sort of deception in place, and you're not able to remove any of these deceptions because you're programmed that way, then fun fact, all of reality is illusory to you, and you can't really know anything as it truly is. Well, if you can't know anything as it truly is, fun fact, you're just stuck like that, and there's nothing you can do. And that's the issue with naturalism. There's no way to actually get through or around this, because your body, your entire system has been designed so that every deep conviction, every deep thought, and every amount of reasoning you do has been determined, right, through materialistic determinism. So I'm this person right here because of their genetics, their internal environment, aka their genetics, and their external environment, the world around them, the data available to them through the world around them, their sensory stimulation data, leads them to have very specific interpretations of the design argument, moral argument, and various theories, such that they are determined to say that naturalism is the most reasonable position under naturalistic, materialistic determinism. Well, if that's the case, then again, you have no good reason. This is another way to look at it. You have no good reason to trust your reasoning faculties to be truth apt, because you had to. You were determined because of your internal determination, genetics, and your external determination, your environment. Because of these things that you had no actual control over, because you're like a fancy reaction machine under naturalism, then your conclusions are not matters of deep reasoning, but like basic responses to stimuli, basically. That's it. Is this analogous to the Kantian noumenal realm in any way, since we can't know things as they really are? Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, that's what Roos was going for. That's what Roos was going for, right? When he said, where did he say this? Okay, yeah. So, so although we might be able to tell reality from illusion within the system, we can tell whether a product is flawed or not. We cannot tell how things really are. My suspicion is that there may be something to this, but we've been aware of this point at least since Kant, if not Hume. Right. So Michael Roos is actually allowing for this as a very real possibility that we can't know reality as it actually is. Well, you can't know reality as it actually is under naturalism. Under naturalism, since everything's just all these different natural processes, there's no soul that's able to reason beyond the materialistic constraints of the body, the genetics, and the environment. Right. There's no deep reasoning happening in this type of immaterial state of the human being, but instead just all these reactions that you have no control over. Then naturalism does lead to this kind of Kantian impossibility of knowledge, except perhaps further than even Kant would say, because now even the imposition of logical structures within the brain, under naturalism, you have no good reason to even trust the logical structures within your brain, which I think, if you can correct me on that, the epitome. But it seems like, at least in Kant's system, the logical structures present in the brain, or at least, somewhat sufficient to coming to certain truths, at least axiomatically. But maybe that's less so from him and other rationalists. I'd have to think about that. But at least under naturalism, you just have no good reason to trust any of the conclusions you come to as being reasonable or rational or more intelligent. How do you know if your conclusions in naturalism are more intelligent than somebody else's? Why? Because your internal genetics and external environment were just determined to give you a more truth apt response. That kind of sounds like it can lead to a weird type of eugenics if that's the case. No, I think naturalism leads to really dangerous, uh, destructive views of reason, and it also leads to self-destructive views of reason and belief. So again, other issues. Oh, Jack Ray, that brings back memories of my oldest brother teaching me about Kantian Newman when I was 12. Yeah, yeah. Looks like we're all talking about a bit of Kant's logical imposition of internal, logical structures, mental structures on the external world. But again, I think that's an issue for naturalism. I do think naturalism does lead to this impossibility of knowledge because of Michael Roos's explanation that prima facie naturalism does not offer a good reason to trust irrational faculties. As a matter of fact, prima facie, naturalism provides good reason to not trust your deepest convictions, beliefs, and rational faculties when it comes to understanding reality. So, under naturalism, prima facie, you have good reasons to not trust your faculties of reason, and then under theism, prima facie, you have good reasons to trust your ability to reason about reality. Plantinga argues that Kant's views are self-refuting, since claiming that you can't know things as they really are is knowledge claiming that you can't know. That's true. Yeah, exactly right. I would actually agree with that, because it does assume that the internal logical structures are trustworthy, which means you can know certain truths. And if you can know certain truths, then Kant's metaphysical claims about reality don't really go too far. I would agree with Plantinga's assessment of Kant. I would. But also nice to have you on, Jack. It's been a bit. Nice to have you on with the epitome. You two are really cool, helping a lot with these discussions here. So here's some other issues I found besides the prima facie considerations that we get from Michael Roos, and also from the issues with materialistic determinism and naturalism, that I find to just make all descriptions of intelligence or more truth apt, more intelligent answers. I find that naturalism, as a result of it being like pure materialistic determinism, and you could say, oh, there's indeterminism because of quantum fluctuation. Fun fact: since you have no control, for any naturalist watching, since you have no control over those quantum fluctuations, this is still a determinism in its practical sense, as in you have no control. You are just being thrown about by quantum winds and waves, right? So again, it is still practically determinism because you can't control it. right? Even if there's a type of indeterminism and quantum fluctuation, and even that's kind of questioned because maybe there's a type of quantum determinism. In either case, that's another issue, is that naturalism destroys your ability to say if something is more or less reasonable, more or less rational, more or less intelligent, because all of those beliefs you have about the intelligibility of something, the truth aptness of it, and all that is materialistically determined, such that any of your claims about something being more intelligent is just meaningless. I mean, like a naturalist saying that religious thought is less intelligent, that doesn't mean anything to me. It's axiologically null. If that makes sense. If that makes sense to you guys, let me know in the comments. But from my perception, given naturalistic assumptions about rationality and the impossibility of a naturalist under their assumptions, under the system, to be more or less rational, because these are just materialistic, materialistically determined mental states about which they have no control, including their self-reflection about which they have no control. It also means that their beliefs about things being more or less intelligent are not, axiologically relevant. Pointing to random quantum fluctuations to ground free thinking is quite the stretch. And I've seen people try to do this, by the way, just so you know the epitome. I've seen people try to say random quantum fluctuations actually means that we do have free will. I'm like, wait, but they're random and we don't have control over it. They're random. It's not us causing the quantum fluctuations, at least under like every single naturalist that I've heard. It's the quantum fluctuations causing the weird kind of brain activity that humans just so happen to have, not the other way around. If we're the plants that's, in the water with the reed just sticking out over the water, and, let's say that we're the plant, the water is like all of the material universe, and then the wind above the water hitting the reed is the quantum fluctuations. Then in both cases, the waves, the water is moving us. So we're determined by our material surrounding. And also the wind up top is moving this around. So even though that seems indeterminate compared to the waves, it's still affecting us in ways, not us affecting the wind, right? So we're just reeds in some sort of weird materialistic and quantum mess. Randomness and rational free choices by agent causation are the same. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Right. So I get kind of tilted when I hear naturalists try to approach that. A reach to quantum changes is a reach beyond our current knowledge envelope, but not outside of existence. So it's still part of the universe per se. And also, that's true too. That's true too. I'd agree. But this is one more issue I have with, again, a lot of the attempts by naturalists to talk about, what's reasonable, unreasonable, and objective or subjective truths. So we have this thing, which is the differentiation of truths. So differentiating between objective truths and subjective truths requires trustworthy observation and reasoning, which is supposed to be part of methodological naturalism. Well, in naturalism, no knowledge from observation and reasoning is trustworthy, given Michael Roos's prima facie observations, and also given later considerations as well, given more evidence from evolutionary naturalism that we can't trust our reasoning faculties about deep convictions like objective morality, which is an objective truth versus a subjective truth. Therefore, naturalism denies this ability to differentiate between objective truths and subjective truths. Well, if that's the case, that's actually a pretty severe issue, is it not? At least when I made this, that's what I found. If you're not able to differentiate between objective truths and subjective truths in a meaningful and reasonable way, then that also means that you can't really tell the difference between a fact and an opinion. You can only tell people that you think something is a fact or you think something is an opinion without any meaningful way to do so. And then same with differentiation of reason. I was kind of getting that at that here, but I think this fleshes it out a little bit more, what I was trying to say in that little diagram I created. Differentiation of reason. Differentiating between reasonable and unreasonable requires knowing relevant facts and sound conclusions. Well, in naturalism, neither is knowable. If something is relevant or irrelevant, sound or unsound, logical or illogical, reasonable or unreasonable. In naturalism, neither is knowable, right? Therefore, naturalism denies this ability to differentiate between reasonable and unreasonable. So a naturalist who's being consistent, any naturalist who's being consistent, should never come to the point where they say that there is a conclusion someone else has that is unreasonable. Number one, because, well, they reason to that point. And so clearly under naturalism, some sort of evolutionary processes led to behaviors and thought processes in their brain that led to that conclusion. So clearly, it's reasonable through evolutionary, naturalistic, and materialistic means. But furthermore, if you're trying to say not unreasonable in that sense, but saying it's irrational, perhaps. Well, here's the thing. How are you able to differentiate between what's rational and irrational, reasonable and unreasonable, when it could be that your brain and the set of behaviors and convictions in your brain that arose from evolutionary pressures are the ones that are actually not truth apt. Maybe the pressures that led to the convictions in your brain are the ones that are less likely to reflect reality. Because I've heard some atheists, some naturalists say, "Oh, well, and this is a very rare case, but some atheist naturalists have said, no, there's good reason to accept for the possibility that our minds do actually have some capability of reasoning about abstract truth. And that's the reason we know, is what some naturalists have said, the reason we know that our brains have been able to, have been selected for their ability to reason about abstract truths is the presence of religious thought in the vast majority of humans for the vast majority of history. So the presence of religious thought shows that humans have had their abilities for abstract reasoning, reliable abilities for abstract reasoning and philosophical reasoning selected for. And so under naturalism, we do have that. But the irony is that that means that atheism is actually a less survival apt state of being, and it's also less apt for coming to truths about abstract reality, because under that assumption that some naturalists have made, they're admitting that religious thought has actually been the evolutionary, an evolutionary outcome that allows for reasoning correctly about abstract realities and philosophical truths. Which means anyone who has an evolutionary predisposition to religious thought actually has greater truth apt abilities for reasoning about abstract truths. And anyone who is evolutionary bound for some reason to have propensity to think non religious terms but atheistically actually has fewer abilities to think truth aptly and correctly about abstract reality. Naturalism breaks down a lot like Zeno's dichotomy paradox. A naturalist would get stuck at the halfway point on the halfway point of the halfway point. Exactly. That's a really good point. It kind of does feel like that, doesn't it? Because there's always just this thing that's withholding them, or every answer that they give actually sends them like halfway back. They never really get even to the halfway mark, because a lot of the assumptions they have to make bring them further and further back as if they never started the conversation. Oh, man. Y'all got my heart rate up. Dear goodness. It's also just one of the issues I have with naturalism. It's just, I don't find naturalism to be tenable in any meaningful sense whatsoever. I think any system, as a general rule, for any naturalists or any atheists who are listening to this later on, besides the prima facie considerations we've already talked about, just understand this. If the system you hold to at the outset, at the get go, undermines your ability to reason rightly about reality and to trust your faculties of reason, then that is a system that's not worth holding to. Okay? So I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it again. If the system you hold to at the outset removes any possibility or reason for trusting your abilities to reason, that system should be rejected. Premise one. Premise two, naturalism, specifically methodological naturalism, does not allow or give a good reason for you to trust in your abilities to reason rightly about reality, but does the opposite. Conclusion, therefore, methodological naturalism, naturalism in a general sense, should not be held to or accepted. Why? Because it's undermining any attempt you give to give reasons for why naturalism is good is not able to be upheld by naturalism, in which you should not find any good reason to trust your reasoning faculties about reality or about these deep convictions about objective morality, objective truth, and the difference between objective versus subjective truths, the difference between reasonable versus unreasonable, rational versus irrational thought, empirical observations, metaphysical truths about the nature of reality, the laws of logic, and what it means for something to be logical versus illogical. All of these are undermined by naturalism. Again, read. I actually recommend you read Michael Rousseau's The Naturalist Challenge to Religion because, again, I find this so uncompelling in the fact that he admits to his answer not being philosophical but psychology. Read this again. Really, philosophically, there is no escape. Okay? As always, one is reminded of Hume, this time on skepticism. Really, philosophically, there is no escape, but psychology rescues us. My sense of peace that I get from my friends, my psychology, is able to help me ignore these deep questions about reality, and it helps me to ignore the fact that I can't trust my reasoning abilities and my rational faculties. I can't trust them, and that is a very real possibility. As a matter of fact, he says it's technically inescapable. There is no escape, but my psychology lets me ignore it. That's like, isn't that crazy that that's a real response from an atheist philosopher? Isn't that insane that that was his response? This reminds me of Schellenberg appealing to theism to explain his making relations to explain morality. They have to borrow from our worldview to explain everything, right? It's infuriating. They say that our worldview is irrational, that it's less truth apt, that it's less intelligent, but then they have to constantly borrow from it in order to make cases and explain aspects of their worldview. But then that makes our worldview actually more truth apt because it explains more truth, which they need to explain parts of their worldview, right? This system would be unreasonable. That system would be unreasonable. Literally, that's good. That's awesome. What book are you reading from? I like to get it. Oh, it's awesome. As you can see, I marked this up to like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I marked this book up all over the place. I mean, I went kind of crazy, not gonna lie. Not gonna lie. Wild stuff. But this is Philosophy of Religion, 5th edition, with selected readings by Oxford University Press. Let me see if I could put it a little bit closer so you guys can see it real quick. Yeah, there we go. I think you guys can see that. I think it's worth it. I do think that this is actually a worthwhile reading. I found it to be quite helpful because, again, as long as you're going slowly through it and you're able to really digest all the issues with the various views, which I do. Again, I marked this thing to, you know, I marked this thing like crazy as I went through it. You guys can see all the highlights and all the pens and everything. It's a lot, I'll admit. There's some sections where I had less to say because it was just uninteresting, but other sections where I had quite a bit to say, especially on Buddhism. That section on Buddhism was interesting. Oh, one of my gospel tracks. That's cool. Well, I use that for a bookmark. That's awesome. So, yeah, I think it's awesome. I do think it's worth it. No doubt about it. I think it's worth it to read through, especially on some of those atheistic analyses of religion. I think they're very funny and very interesting to see how people think about religion from an atheistic perspective. So, for any naturalists who are thinking, if you're watching this right now, and again, I don't know if there's any naturalists who are going to watch this later on, the Epitome and Jack Ray have been really helpful in trying to, explain this even further and further in the comments. But let's just talk about this in a practical sense. We've already talked about this in the epistemological sense, right? Differentiation of reason is gone. Differentiation of truth as objective versus subjective is gone. You basically break down into like a type of worse Kantian, Humean skepticism because of your materialistic determinism in the naturalism. You can't really trust any of the conclusions you come to empirically or through reason, which again was the foundation of all this. That methodological naturalism embodies a proper procedure for acquiring knowledge through reason and observation. But under naturalism, according to Michael Ruse, you have no good reason to actually believe these deep convictions you have about your observations and your reasoning about things that are very deep convictions, like even like objective morality and other things that he admits. There's a type of deep skepticism about reality itself. And so, since you have materialistic determinism, all of your beliefs about naturalism are also determined, not such that they're intelligent beliefs, but that they're just beliefs you have. So, any naturalist who's being honest would not say that they believe naturalism because it's the most intelligent and most explanatorily sufficient belief system. They believe naturalism because they have to, because of, the materialistic and even quantum determinism that leads them to believe that thing is the most rational, even if in reality it's not. It's like a kind of, anti-realism that you see in the philosophy of science. That's basically what a naturalist should take about just reality in general. They should take a type of anti-realist approach about philosophies and worldviews, and they should say, I don't believe in naturalism because it's actually true. I believe that naturalism is true, but the actual real reason I believe that naturalism is true is because of my genetic predispositions and my environment, which act on certain genetic precursors to develop within me the belief that naturalism is true, but that doesn't actually make it true. That just makes it so that I believe it's true because I have to. I know it sounds kind of convoluted, but again, I'm trying to explain, this anti-realist approach that naturalists really should have towards philosophical reasoning and just kind of all reasoning in general. And so the effects of these findings for the naturalist would be this: science, all conclusions and findings are likely meaningless or false. When I say likely meaningless, I mean to say that even if they were true, you wouldn't be able to know if they are, right? So that's why there's like a type of anti-realism. There's a skepticism. For morality, no way to know objective versus subjective morality. It could be the case, all right, for the naturalists who are probably going to say, oh, hey, you know what? It could be the case, though, David. Maybe there really is. Maybe there really is objective morality. You don't know that. I'm not saying that under naturalism, these facts cease to exist. I could argue in a different way that they cease to exist or they never would have existed in the first place in naturalism, but that's besides the point. I'm not saying that these facts just, cease to exist. I'm saying that you would have no epistemological or epistemic approach to differentiating or discovering if there is a difference between objective versus subjective morality. If there are objective facts about morality, even if you're a naturalist who takes some sort of, natural realism about moral facts, right? That doesn't matter because you wouldn't have any way to meaningful adjudicate if that's more or less likely than some other system. In science, all conclusions and findings are likely meaningless or false because you have to use observations in science and then, the scientific method, which you can't really prove through science anyways. It's just a thing you have to presuppose. And then you have to assume your reasoning is good while knowing that your reasoning under naturalism is not something that's any more or less reasonable and truth apt than a lower ape's reasoning faculties. Again, consider the doubt Darwin had. Religious dialogue, theistic conclusions are not unlikely or unreasonable. Why? Because there's no way to think, they're not unlikely or unreasonable. You could say there's no way to know if they're unlikely or unreasonable. And under some evolutionary approaches to answering the theist under naturalism by saying, well, no. Actually, the presence of religion is a demonstration of the fact that humans do have the ability, if religious, to reason abstractly correctly about deeper philosophical points. I thought about naturalism a lot in college around 1999. I kept getting the equivalent to divide by zero errors. Yeah, just a lot of constant destruction at that. I tend to use the term moral realism rather than objective or subjective morality because it avoids common response. You're running objective morality in a subject. That's fair. That's fair. I think that's why I kind of started to switch to like a type of description about, natural realism. But I think the difference in not being able to differentiate between those facts still holds. But I like that. Yeah, I recognize the objection missed the point, but I still like to avoid it. You're right, and it's true. I have actually heard naturalists and different atheists say that that language does kind of lead to confusion. So I appreciate that. I think that's a good point. And I'll probably try to use moral realism because a lot of them will say, by the way, I do hold to moral realism. I think it's just some sort of fact present in nature, although I find that so strange. But besides the point, good point. I like that. Inshallah, we may have reason one day. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. Bismillah. That's hilarious. That's awesome, Jack. Naturalism. Naturalistic beliefs are likely illusory as a result of these evolutionary deceptions. So, under scientific approaches to evolution, can't know if evolution is true or even likely true. True or true apt. So, again, conclusions for the Christian theist. We have a prima facie good epistemic reason to reject naturalism and atheism. We have a prima facie good epistemic reason to reject any conclusion or philosophical developments from naturalists until they reject materialism or other such deterministic models. And we have a prima facie good epistemic reason to embrace Christian theism. So again, this was an older presentation. I will admit that some of my language was slightly more simple than it could have been. It really could have been significantly more robust, and I think more explanatorily significant, some of my explanations. But this was a couple years ago, and so I was more simple in the way that I was approaching some of this. That being said, I still think that my observations about the issues with Michael Roos's response, naturalist response to religion, still hold, as obviously you guys felt the exact same way. And so I think that it still holds even to this day. I really do. So that is my observation there. It's also pretty late my time. It's pretty late. But I think I'm going to have to probably dip in a few minutes. I really do appreciate y'all staying with me, though. And I appreciate the engagement. You guys really helped out a ton when it comes to going through each of my slides one by one. Anyone who's watching right now, thank you so much for watching. Please also leave a like. I'm just going to talk for the next couple of minutes about anything that y'all have to talk about in the audience, in the comment section. I'm hoping to do a lot more of these redos of my old presentations now that I have a much better microphone, a much better camera, much better lighting. Everything is just higher quality now. And so I will be redoing a lot of my old videos that were poor audio quality, really bad angles, just dark, way too dark, and really grainy. So I'm going to be redoing a lot of my videos, a lot of them, a lot of my presentations. So I'm sure a lot of you will be able to enjoy much better versions, much better versions. A lot of my prior presentations. I was watching a bit of the Wes Huff interview and took a break for some light stuff, but then I found this. Oh yeah, how was that? Oh, you know what's so sad? I didn't get a chance to look at the Wes Huff interview on Joe Rogan. What do you think of it? How was that going? Did it seem like Joe Rogan was following along, or did he bring a lot of the conspiracy theory stuff from the whole Billy Carson crowd through? How was Wes Huff on that? That sounds interesting. And sorry, Jack, for throwing a whole info dump on the epistemic impossibility, or as I like to call it, the insurmountable agnosticism of the naturalist. That's what I titled that presentation. There's a lot of information in that interview that I did not have a clue on. It was more general than just Billy Carson. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. All right, that's really good. That's really good because Wes Huff is a fount of knowledge. Thank God. Um, Jesus really blessed that man with quite a brain. So I'm really happy to hear that. There's a talk of a literal treasure map found within the depths. Okay. Really? Wait, like, no way, really? Let's talk about a literal treasure map found within the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. Great stream. Thanks for talking about high-level arguments against naturalism. We need more robust defenses of theism out there. Thanks, Steve. I'm trying, God willing, I can do a lot more of this after the wedding. I got a wedding 1 month and 1 week away from today. Well, yesterday. And so hopefully I can do a lot more. I am trying to do a couple of these later at night. That's really something I'm trying to do if I can find the time for it. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing some more presentations on what was it? I'm going to be redoing one of my earlier presentations on my channel. That's my first live stream. I'm going to be redoing that on the Trinity. And so I'm going to be talking about the nature of the Trinity and why out of all the models of God, in order for certain classical model attributes of God to be present, namely his omnibenevolence and his eternality, or if you want to instead switch that around, if you take an RT Mullins view, his omnibenevolence, like his essential goodness and his immutability, his unchanging nature at his essence, at his being. If you take those two qualities, which Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all allow for, only one of them actually allows for an eternally, perfectly loving model of God. And so that's what my Trinitarian explanation is there, which is fun. Cover scroll. in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Verbal map, not a drawn one. I really enjoyed your video on the Trinity and omniscience. Oh, okay. I was just talking about that. Thank you very much, The Epitome. And Jack Ray, that sounds insane. There's a type of secret verbal map. I can imagine, I can see the thumbnail now. I just got it. Is there a treasure map in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Secret treasures of the Bible. Right, I can see. Oh my goodness. So just the dollar signs, the ad revenue, it's insane. I'm not even monetized yet. Are you kidding me? But that's awesome. That's really interesting. And I appreciate that epitome. I really enjoyed your video on the Trinity and Omniscience. I'm trying to actually broaden it out. I want to redo my presentation for like the third time now on beauty. I've been doing a lot of work on retrieving aesthetic considerations for philosophical arguments for theism. And I'm trying to really make it as in depth as I can, showing the insufficiency of naturalism to explain the aesthetic experience and also maybe aesthetic facts. It takes a lot more work there, but I think naturalism does fail to explain aesthetic facts and the broadness of the aesthetic experience because it's not just physical, but all like physical visual, but also physical audible and also non-physical abstract things like concepts that we find beautiful. And so that seems to be insufficiently explained in a naturalistic model. But theism does allow for beauty to kind of transcend the physical visual versus physical non-visual versus physical abstract or non-physical abstract concepts of beauty. And so I'm definitely gonna. Oh yeah, the argument from music. Yes, that actually is. Well, okay. So the argument from music kind of like takes two parts of my first part of my argument for beauty, which is that it is somewhere in between like the mathematical, so like the conceptual beauty, right, that music is a reflection of mathematic abstract truths, but then also music is a physical but non-visual auditory experience, and then the experience of music is not just an experience of sound, right, but like an actual experience of music as a distinct reality. And so that is part of my first argument of my three-part-ish argument of beauty, or at least there's like three sets of arguments there. I don't know. It's kind of complicated when it comes to the aesthetic principles and aesthetic considerations, but I'm getting there, getting there. So hidden knowledge of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Have you looked into arguments for music in that realm? Yeah. So I'm hoping I can redo that. If I can redo that, those arguments for beauty, I would be so happy. I really would. Because my other attempts at my beauty presentation, there was always some technological difficulties so that people didn't even see my presentation for like half of it. And I didn't know until later. Or I had such bad internet issues, which I don't know about this presentation. Have I had any serious stutters or internet issues while doing this presentation? If so, let me know in the comments because I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have been able to know this whole time if that's the case. Seems to me that if naturalism is true, we like music because my genes have told me so, and I'm under the illusion that it's meaningful. Yeah, I mean, there would have to be like in some sort of evolutionary illusory, result or a type of evolutionary naturalistic deception that causes us to enjoy music. But there would at least have to be like some sort of good reason because music isn't just this thing that's like semi-present, but it is like homogenous and ubiquitous throughout all cultures, throughout all times, right? This enjoyment of music. And so something that like a behavior that propagates that much, at least from an ethnological perspective, right? The evolution of behaviors in communities. From an ethnological and ethnographic perspective, I feel like anything that comes to be that ubiquitous would not just have to be something that's like neutrally selected for, but that it would have to be like actively positively selected for. But then I'd have to wonder what active positive selective pressure confers greater survival benefit physically or sexually to humans through their strange fixation on various types of music rather than just like, oh, a certain bird song and it's like, oh, we like this bird song and so it helps us to find the right mate. Well, no, it seems like it's more important for like it's not just important for community. Also, you find humans who just enjoy listening to music just because they like it, right? So then you can do that with community or without community. So like it's really confusing trying to limit the aesthetic experience in music, in paintings or drawings, in books that we read. Yeah, there's some settings where you do that communally, and there's some settings where you do that individually. And then there's some settings where you want to do it with this community, but not that community, and other settings where you can't stand to do it in community at all. It just seems too individual of an experience for it to really be something that's just like this, clear evolutionary pressure that in any meaningful sense, at least. It's also not beneficial to survival in any obvious way. Exactly. In some cases, at least, again, I'll talk about this more in my presentation on aesthetics and beauty. But in some cases, it's actually not just not necessarily beneficial. I'd actually say that there's a lot of cases in which it's anti-beneficial. It's actually negative for the individual because they're distracted by something that is, preventing them from developing survival relevant skills, right? So yeah, you can hit the bongos and that's kind of cool, but in what way are you developing greater skills? Well, you could say, oh, well, this music leads to greater pair bonding and greater community bonding of the individuals. Okay, perhaps that doesn't explain like the complexity though, because then we add like more instruments and then singing to the mix and then like dancing to the singing, to the instruments. And so we're just adding all of these things, but then I just can't see why we would have all these behaviors. And then we're also wasting resources like animal skins and we're wasting energy, right? For these communal dances when we could just sit there and listen to the music. But no, we also have these dances and we choose to sing, which by the way, it takes a lot of energy to sing, right? It takes a lot to use your diaphragm and produce this oxygen and stuff like that. So it's a very energetically costly experience. And it's even potentially like an experience that's costly in terms of our survival. If you look at the usage of animal skins and different parts of an animal for that instead of to keep ourselves warm. So it's not just. I mean, I agree. Obviously, epitome that it's not clearly beneficial in any obvious way. I think it might also, though, in many ways, be negative. I play guitar all by myself all the time and don't play for others. I don't see how any of that has to do with survival. Yeah, same here. Group cooperation, communication to more effectively perform as a group in other situations. Exactly. Yeah. There's a very strong meta on this. We see it in war. That's fair. That's fair. It's a good way to kind of try to gather people together into a communal setting to help them be more in tune in general. But then I would still say that there's like energetic waste that just isn't necessary. Like we could all just play instruments, right? But then adding the dance to it along with the individual people singing music along with the instruments, it just seems like so much, like a lot. And then also, when I am playing with a group of people, I don't usually do that so that I can go out there and more effectively beat people up and steal their resources. Usually, I'm just there because I want to grow closer to them. As a group doing a variety of things seems like a waste until you find out the meta makes it not. Sure, sure. No, I mean I agree with that. That's a possibility. I just think that the aesthetic experience of music still isn't fully sufficiently explained by some of the skill acquisition from group behavior. And then again, also when you're doing it individually, that still doesn't really help. That's fair. That's fair. No, I think I understand what you're saying. I'm still wondering at what point naturalism fails to explain some of the experience, and then where it, or why it would fail to explain then, because then I would agree with you, Jack Ray, that I would actually agree that the communal benefit conferred by all these people playing and dancing together and all that, that could be a beneficial, possible naturalistic explanation for all of them working together for this communal act that uses music. That could be a sufficient explanation. But then I would say, okay, so this should be something relegated to like a type of community aspect or community behavior. But then why would humans start doing it individually? Now that would be the confusing part because now it seems like this should at least ethnologically and then when it comes to like that ethnographic relationship with genetics and behaviors genetically linked, to certain behaviors, then you say, okay, so music is a communal experience. So then why is it that people would play music just for their individual sakes and stuff. It doesn't help or hurt naturalism itself. It's just a thing. I agree. Yeah, we're taught to work as a group in the Bible with music. That's true. That's true. Right. And there's really good reasons under theism to assume that we would both individually and in a group play music, I think. So I think theism actually allows for this because humans are individual beings, but we're also communal beings because we're made by a God who is a community of persons. So I think theism, yet again, has like greater explanatory scope for it. While naturalism could explain maybe the communal aspect, but not so much the individual aspect, if that makes sense. Um, for any naturalist watching, I'm just saying, again, I still think theism has greater explanatory scope, even for that. Then there's the idea that Beethoven's fifth seems to truly exist. Does that make sense? Yeah. Beethoven's fifth seems to truly exist. That's interesting. Hmm. We feel alone. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. We're made by a God who's a community of persons. So it makes sense that we would naturally, it is not good for man to be alone, as the Lord says in Genesis. That's true. That's true. But it is now officially, at least my time, past 1 a.m. And I got some things for my students to do tomorrow in preparation for their finals. Stand alone together. That's right. Stand alone together. Wow. Well, thank you so much, you two, and everybody who's watching. I know it says four, so anyone who's watching, if you haven't liked yet, you better do it right now. I see where you are. Well, not really. I wish I could. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. Yeah, legit, isn't that right? No, we got to stay awake somehow. Got to prepare all these finals for my kids, from my high school students. But yeah, good night. Thank you so much for watching, Jack Ray. As usual, thank you so much for being on. Always appreciate the engagement. Epitome, thank you so much for joining on too, and anyone else who's watching, anyone else who watches later on. I always appreciate people coming on. Let me pray us out. Father God, I thank you so much for each viewer. I thank you for them joining together with me tonight in order to discuss the insurmountable agnosticism of naturalism. I pray that our discussions would be easily parsed out and that in their minds they would see all things clearly so that they might more clearly and efficiently speak with naturalist friends and family about the insufficiency of their system, but yet the beauty that you, Lord Jesus, offer to us in your explanation of all things from logic, reason, rationality, and intelligibility. Thank you, God, for making this universe the way that you did and making us such that we can see the order within it. I pray that we all have a wonderful night's sleep tonight and a good day tomorrow. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. All right. Love you all. Y'all have a wonderful night. And as always, stay prayed up.